Good morning. We'll call the meeting to order. Council is conducting this meeting in person and via conference call in accordance with the MGA Section 199. Council chambers is now open for public attendance. However, councillors and members of the public may still join meetings remotely using our current teleconference process. If you've submitted a comment request, the chair will call on you at the appropriate time. The chair may also ask for comments and concerns from the public relating to a particular topic, and at this time, phone lines will be unmuted. If you would like to speak, please state your name. We ask that only one member of the public speak at a time. All persons will be allotted 10 minutes to speak, as per our procedural bylaw. We ask that if the meeting recesses, that any callers hang up and call back in as the meeting reconvenes. This helps with call quality. Please note this call is being recorded and will be uploaded to our website and/or social media. To eliminate background noise, please mute your phone during the meeting. Everyone has a right to be present at council meetings and council committee meetings. Any attendees that are considered disruptive to the progression of this meeting may be removed at the discretion of the chair as per the MGA Section 198. We thank you for your cooperation and understanding. We have an agenda before us. Does anybody have any additions or changes?
Excuse me. An addition, and got a request for a letter of support for the horseshoe pitch and agriculture grounds, I think, and stuff. I sent the email around to what I have. Most of it's talking on the phone.
We can put that under 2.31. Any other additions or changes?
Good morning, Reeve Link. Brian from administration. I have a few items to potentially add to the agenda. So we have prepared a Redland water funding options presentation for council's consideration. So we're hoping to maybe add that to 2.3.2.
Sounds good.
0.3.1.
We just added Councillor Kester's under 2.3.1, so we'll just shift it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then there's a point, in addition for the Agricultural Services Board Service Rights Advocacy, and Councillor Larson will be speaking to that one. So we're hoping to add that one under 2.3.3. And then we have two in-camera additions. The first one being the a demand letter from the villages of Rockyford and Standard. So that's at a set appointment time at 11 a.m. And that would be going under FOIP Section 27. And then the last item for council's consideration for addition to the agenda today is a development matter under Section 24 of FOIP. Thank you.
Any other additions or changes? If not, a motion to approve the agenda is amended.
So moved.
Councillor Larson has moved. Any questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried. We had the minutes circulated from our May 3rd regular council meeting. Should anyone see any errors or omissions? If not, a motion to approve is presented.
Also move.
Councillor Bigger has moved. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried. We'll move to 2.11. Good morning.
Good morning, Council. Taylor Felt with the County's Planning and Development Services team here to present Bylaw 2022-06 for Council's consideration of first reading and requesting that Council schedule a public hearing for June 21st and not June 7th as noted in the report before you. This bylaw is a proposal to redesignate a 146-acre parcel within Southwest 30, 2424, west of the 4th, from the Agricultural General District to the Direct Control District. The parcel is located approximately half a mile east of the town of Strathmore, immediately northeast of the intersection of Township Road 244 and Range Road 250. The location map can be found on page 18 of the agenda package, which I have up on the screen here. The proposal is being made to facilitate the future development of the Western Event Centre by the Strathmore and District Agricultural Society. The Western Event Centre will have a seating capacity between 1,500 and 2,000 that will contain a variety of uses, including an equestrian and entertainment venue, community and cultural facilities, and other compatible and supplementary amenities. The direct control bylaw proposes 3 development cells, which are illustrated on page 19 of the agenda. The development cells have been located to direct more intensive uses with potential for greater off-site impacts to cell 1, with lower intensity uses provided across the remainder of the parcel. Cell 1 will provide for the Western Event Centre, which will include a riding arena, livestock rental stalls, rough stock enclosures, concession areas, a commercial kitchen, parking, offices, and event space. Cell 2 is primarily allocated for overflow parking and short-term overnight stays for event participants and attendees. Cell 3 is intended to promote the continuation of agricultural land uses that will support the event center's initiatives, and this includes agricultural operations, livestock grazing, 4-H events, and potentially a rodeo school activities. Note that an employee dwelling is also being proposed as a discretionary use within cells 1 and 2 to allow for the consideration of on-site caretakers during events. And cell 3 includes uses to allow for short-term stays such as a dormitory dwelling. Currently, the county's land use bylaw does not include a district that provides for the unique mix of uses that's being proposed. However, the direct control district bylaw will resolve this. Generally, the proposal aligns with key policy areas within the municipal development plan, specifically section 3.5 as it relates to tourism. The tourism objectives and policies seek to promote agritourism and tourism in general throughout the county as an economic development tool that fosters year-round tourism opportunities to encourage continuous tourism visits, to leverage tourism as a regional tool to attract investment and interest in the county, and to diversify the county's tourism destinations. Several policies within Section 3.5 also require the proposal to demonstrate that it will not have adverse impacts on nearby lands, and that if any impacts are identified to nearby lands or the natural environment, that they must be mitigated by the applicant to the county's satisfaction. If the land use redesignation is granted by council, a development permit will be required prior to any future development on the site, at which time the details regarding landscaping, site access, stormwater management, water and wastewater servicing will be determined. These technical reports and studies will support the servicing of the site and will be required at the development permit stage. The applicant also included a conceptual traffic impact assessment with their submission. However, final and comprehensive assessment that addresses any potential impacts to the county's transportation networks will also be required at the development permit stage. And these studies are intended to ensure that development doesn't negatively impact adjacent lands. Stakeholders and landowners within a 1-mile radius were notified of the application, and comments were received and have been included in the agenda package for council's review. Again, please note the error in Resolution 2 that if council chooses to grant first reading of Bylaw 2022-06, that the request is to schedule a public hearing for June 21st and not June 7th. And this is just to allow enough time to notify the public and collect any responses. And that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to take questions, and I'll just bring up on the screen the amended resolutions that administration is recommending.
Any questions from council? Just keeping in mind we're just doing first reading, and then we'll hold our public hearing and can hold debate after that.
I have a question about process. So if we did redesignate this land and then it comes to the development permit and we deny it, would it then revert back to Ag General, or it would just always be in this GC anyways, or how does that work?
Through the REEF, there is a mechanism in the MGA that allows council to revert back to the previous land use designation. Alternatively, the applicant could suggest another redesignation application.
Any other questions?
Sorry, another one. So this is very close. It's a half a mile right from Strathmore. What if Strathmore grows, and what happens when? I'm just curious. Do they absorb it if it were? I'm curious if you know what the repercussions are of them being so close to Strathmore limits.
Would you like me?
Sure.
Okay. So through the Reeve to council, great question. Right now, as it stands, obviously we've just exited the growth board, so there are a couple of statutory documents that we have to get in place: an intermunicipal development plan and intermunicipal collaboration framework. When development occurs, residential, R1, R2, mixed use, whatever that may be, this development built theoretically may have or may be starting to get built. So they have to take those considerations into account all the time when you develop something, right? So if you're developing a R1 residential subdivision that's expanding to the border, close proximity to this development, the considerations need to be put into consideration absolutely when you plan and develop something. So the developer, the town of Strathmore, obviously the county would be circulated in such a way, but those considerations would be future on the developer and the development moving forward. This right now, as it stands, we have a direct control with the best kind of mix of uses, the best kind of cells that we can kind of place and orient. So if council so chooses to move forward with the first reading and this maybe passes hypothetically in the future, and then we get to the development permit stage, you know, it's kind of first to market in a sense.
Okay.
So that's ultimately what it would be. But there are considerations that adjacent developments have to take if they're building near a development or an operation like this.
One final question. Sorry about this.
absolutely.
Have we considered moving cell 1 into the northeast corner? Just because of the neighbors nearby. Like, I was wondering if the more intensive building site could be located further away from the existing farms there, houses.
Through the Reeve, generally it is a best planning practice to allocate your most intensive use nearest the transportation infrastructure. But ultimately, it would be up to the applicant or council to make that suggestion and to take that back to the applicant and have some back and forth discussion on rejigging the development area.
About traffic flows and things like that. Okay. All right.
And Matt didn't mention, but if this gets built out and it's in the county land and it gets annexed by Strathmore, there has to be consideration for that in the annex proposal, right? If there's a recent development, they have to more or less pay our taxes for a few years or whatever the agreement is, but there will be consideration.
Awesome. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to ensure that if this goes forward, that the public hearing, the letters that were in here will carry forward, or do they have to re-put them?
Through the Reeve, I can include them in the package. We'll also have, I suspect, more from the public hearing notifications that we'll send out, and I'll separate the two based on the dates they were received.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure because people put the effort to have it here, and it's more effective at the public hearing, I believe, so I just wanted to make sure it was there. With that, I'll move that council move the first reading. Bylaw 2022-06, this being a bylaw for the purpose of amending land use bylaw number 2016-01 to redesignate plus or minus 59.29 hectares of Southwest 3024 west of the 4th from agricultural general district to direct control district as shown in this attached Schedule A, forming part of this bylaw.
Deputy Reeve Clausen has moved. Any further questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried.
I'll move that a public hearing for bylaw 2022-06 be scheduled for June 21st, 2022 at 9 a.m. in Wheatland County Council Chambers.
Councillor Custer.
And do we anticipate a large group for this, or will the chambers be big enough, or could we move to the ELC if we get a bigger group?
We feel like we could accommodate everyone that would be potentially showing up, and if not, we could have a backup plan. We can potentially have one.
As long as there's a backup plan.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried. Move to 2.31.
Oh, the horseshoe pit.
Yeah, you betcha.
Send everyone that email I received from Denise Peterson. I talked to her on the phone. The horseshoe pit has gotten what is the grant? The Horizons grant, I think, that circulates around. They got money to build it. It's built. They're just looking for a little bit of a letter of support because there are people in the area that would maybe donate shrubs or grass seed or something to beautify the pitch. So it's just a letter of support. Then they'll take it to whoever they think they want to give it to. So it's just a letter of support that we think it's a nice project, and I believe it's on the agricultural grounds in Strathfield. And with that, I'll move that we send a letter of support.
Questions or discussion? Right.
I said it's quiet this morning.
All in favor? Motion is carried. Move to 2.3.2, Redland Water.
Good morning, Council. Brad Bullock from Administration presenting. I'm just going to pull up the presentation for this. Okay. So last council meeting and previous ones, council had directed administration to look into potential options for infrastructure as well as funding for potable water servicing for the community of Redland. And so this presentation is, I guess, the first part of that. We have coordinated, as council directed as well, with the WRC on this. My understanding is the general manager with the WRC will be presenting similar information but more which is within the WRC scope to this during the board meeting tomorrow. So this presentation is intended as information for council. At this point in time, the intention would be to let it go to the WRC, see what comes out of that board, and then bring that information to council. Of course, council can make whatever decision they want today, but that's the process that the board meeting with WRC is tomorrow, and so they'll be presenting similar information. Just the outline of the presentation. So a presentation of the local improvement tax program from the MGA. Tracy, our general manager of corporate and finance, will be presenting that section. Afterwards, we'll look into some of the specific options, not all of the options, but some of the probably more salient or recommended options for servicing in Redland, including funding options, both if it were to follow the capital project and funding stream through Wheatland County, or if it was to follow that similar stream through the WRC. There's some differences there which we'll highlight and outline for council. So with that, I'll invite Tracy up to present the local improvement tax.
Good morning, council. A local improvement is defined as a project that council considers to be of greater benefit to an area of the municipality than the whole and is to be paid for in whole or in part by a tax. A group of owners in a municipality may petition council for a local improvement as per MGA Section 391. A local improvement can also be initiated by council, Section 393. Should council receive a valid petition, it must be signed by 2/3 of the owners who represent at least half of the assessed property values. Petitions have very clearly defined rules that owners must follow. In fact, Municipal Affairs has a document that outlines what constitutes a valid petition. This is the document. After the CAO confirms that a petition is valid, it is then approved by council and a local improvement plan is prepared. The plan must include the proposed improvement, identify the parcels of land, the persons liable to pay, and whether the tax rate is based on assessment, each parcel of land, each unit of frontage, or each unit of area. Also included in the plan is the estimated cost or the project and the period of which the cost will be spread. It must include if the municipality will pay for a portion of the cost, revenue raised by the local improvement tax, and other sources of revenue. Other costs can include purchasing land, professional services, repaying existing debt, and other expenses related to the project. The plan is then sent to all landowners. A valid petition objecting to the project must be filed within 30 days to the CAO. If a petition is not filed, council must pass a local improvement tax bylaw. The bylaw must provide for equal payments during each year in the period of which the cost of the project will be spread, set a uniform tax rate based on assessment, parcel of land, unit of frontage, or unit of area. Council may set a uniform tax rate based on estimated average cost throughout the municipality for a similar type of improvement. And that rate applies whether the actual cost of the local improvement is greater or less than the uniform tax rate. Should a new owner wish to receive the benefit of the improvement, council can revise the tax rate bylaw. And there's also a section under 409 regarding private connections to a local improvement. The municipality may construct private connections from the local improvement to the street line if council approves the construction. And the cost of construction of private connection must be imposed against the parcel of land that benefits from it, and the owner of the parcel has no right to petition against its construction. So just two FAQs. So do I have to pay if I don't support the project? Yes. So once council approves the project and construction has been completed, all property owners affected by the improvement are required to pay, even if they are opposed to the project. And payment options that would be included in the bylaw could be a full payout, annual payments, interest is included and is fixed for the term of the bylaw. Partial or entire payments could also be applied to the account at any time. And that ends my presentation on local improvements. Any questions?
Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you, Tracy. So moving on to the next section of the presentation, just an overview of the optional pathways for infrastructure ownership, operation, and funding of this system. And this is really coming out of the fact that Wheatland County has two means of providing services within the county. So one through the county, and then also the Wheatland Regional Corporation, which also provides utility servicing, and which we all know has a line that runs directly through Redland. So just an aerial view of the community of Redland. We may refer back to this. I just wanted to add this into the presentation in case there's any questions that do come up in more detailed manner, but so we just included this in there. One point to note is, for anybody who isn't aware, is that WRC main line, potable water line, runs up First Street West on the left-hand side of the screen there. So these are the two main streams. They're small here. Other slides do have them closer up. So, but we've essentially just outlined two streams with the what we would typically recommend under each stream for infrastructure installation, as well as what might make the most sense for funding models as well under each stream. Obviously, in this, there's a lot of different options that are available over and above what's on this screen or on this flow chart. However, we've just chosen the ones that we feel are most practical. So with that overall outline, we'll go into options for the water distribution system design itself. So on the Wheatland County side, the way these systems would work is we would have the main WRC line. Coming off of that line, we would have a point of transition. So this is similar to the distribution systems, how they work with the community like Rosebud and Gleason. There'd be a valve there, and that would be your point of transition, and a meter to meter the water coming off of that. After that would be the county system distributing within the community. And then within there, we've broken that further down into a fully shared distribution system. And by that, what we mean is you could come off of that point of transmission, install a reservoir that would be used by the community as a whole with a pump, and so that reservoir would draw from the WRC line continuously, fill that up overnight during off-peak hours, and then you would have that extra water there during peak hours. And then there would be a pump there to supply continuous pressure to the residents, as well as pressure-reducing valves and all of that fun stuff that would be needed there. The other option here, very similar to the system that the WRC would provide as well, would be to not have the reservoir or the pump, that each house would have their own cistern with a trickle system that would fill up in each residence, and then they would draw from that cistern for their own house. That's a very similar system, or the same, that the WRC typically installs for their rural connections. On the WRC side, we've covered the ones. One option that has been explored in the past is, rather than a shared distribution line within the community, is that each residence within there that wants to hook up to the WRC line would have their own line off of the main line. So that would be similar again to what would be your typical rural connections. It may make sense depending on the number of residences that are interested to hook up. From a cost perspective, if you have enough residents wanting to hook up to the water system, a common distribution line through portions of that community would probably be the more economically efficient way to go. Which is what's represented on the left-hand side of the WRC stream. And then moving down there, so the WRC has essentially two options for installing these lines. One is they would install, call it a vault on the outside, so this would be located at the property line. And in that vault is a valve and a meter, a pressure reducer, and a backflow preventer. And so that's all contained in a vault that's held outside. And then the other option is all of those components get installed inside of the home, with the exception of the shutoff valve, which would have to be installed outside. And that's important, whether it's a WRC system or a Wheatland County system, because it gives the operating entity the ability to turn water off. If there's a problem in the house that people can't access the house, you need to have that ability to be able to shut the water off on the outside, which is typical for all municipal systems. Any questions on this slide before we move on?
Can you just elaborate, and forgive my ignorance about all of this, but the equipment that would be supplied in the vault, I heard you say like a backflow I might not be getting the language right. What does that do? And what does the other equipment that would be installed in the vault do?
So the backflow preventer, it just prevents backflow into the main line from the residence. And so if there is a differential in pressure, for some reason the pressure on the residence side gets higher than what's in the main line, you want to prevent that water from going back into the main line and potentially contaminating it of whatever might be in there. So it's very typical for irrigation systems and things to have that as well, to make sure you're not introducing contaminants into the main treated line. The meter would be there to measure the flow, and that would go back then to the unit rates that people would pay for their water. So both for tracking how much water is getting used and also comes through on the utility bills. The pressure reducers, homes have to operate under a certain pressure, and so it just makes sure that whatever pressure is in the main line, it gets reduced before it gets into the home, so you're not damaging stuff in there. Most plumbing is rated for a certain pressure, so you often have to reduce that down or have that control device to make sure you're not overpressurizing the components in the house. And I feel like I missed one. Oh, and then just the shut-off valve. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
Absolutely. So then differentiating the two kind of streams, I see like interior valve meter, like under the, I think either stream there was those options, right?
Yeah, so all of those components,
Can you just differentiate that like a little bit more, what the implications of that are, and if there's concerns with either model? I just need to understand that a bit better.
Between having the components installed in the vault or inside the home. There's all the same components. Outside the home, in the vault, you have to make sure that things don't freeze, and so it has to be deep enough. And there's standard designs that WRC does use for these vaults. So no real difference in performance except for making sure things don't freeze up. These are buried and below ground, and so there might need to be a little bit of insulation or things in that vault to keep it from freezing. But in terms of performance-wise, it's not a big difference. There may be a difference in cost between the two. We have a decent idea of how much it costs for these vaults to go in, obviously, though they do get installed through the WRC. As far as the cost difference between the vault option and putting the components inside the home, we don't have that right now, but if council were to direct administration to go and do this study and come up with the plan, we would work out all those costs and come back to council with those.
And then just in terms of like control and say accessing for issues or that type of thing, I've been having conversations with some other municipalities recently around like cannabis grow operations or things like that, where sometimes they're making changes to electrical systems or water systems or things like that. Are there concerns with having that on the property owner side, if that's how I understand the one stream would be? Or are they all on the county side? Like, are they all accessible by the county, I guess?
Yeah, typically the shut-off valve would be installed on the property line or near the property line, and so, but it would be accessible to the county. Yes.
And the rest of the equipment as well, the backflow and all that. All of the streams that would be on either the WRC or the Wheatland County would have access to those.
If it was in the vault, it would have access within the vault. If it was installed inside the home, then the county wouldn't have access to those except for the meter reading devices, which would be accessible.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Both of the difference is what we see in most of our hamlets is where the meters are inside the homes. WRC has the vaults because for the rural connections, and I know there's been trouble getting vaults recently. They're probably, last ones we ordered, I think were 6 months out. So there's a cost savings
Supply chain.
to have it. So there's no, and it works in all the other hamlets having meters in the home, so it's not really an issue there.
and the valves and all that as well.
Yeah, it's common practice. So, yeah, cities, all the towns, everything's pretty much in that. If you get into the warmer climates and stuff, then you have vaults and property lines, but typically up here you don't because of the depth trying to get at them. So.
And through the read, just to clarify as well, those components would be paid for by the homeowner. So usually they're installed with the construction of the house or something like this. They would be paid for by the homeowner for the individual connections. And that's in line, as Tracy presented, with the individual connections with the local improvement taxes. Any of the costs associated with the individual connection to each residence is the responsibility of the homeowner.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
So just to be clear, if we go ahead with this with either option, the people that want the water will pay for this?
Through the read, yes. Though I don't know if I'm understanding the full scope of your question.
Okay, where I live, I have a well and I have a pressure system and stuff. That's all my responsibility. I don't expect the county to pay for it. If I have to drill a new well, it's going to cost me $20,000, and I'm not coming to the county to say I want $20,000 to drill a new well. My concern with this is I understand that they have to have water. I just think that we probably have a responsibility to supply the water to them, but not at our expense.
Just to supplement Councillor Larson's question. So I would say that the funding option is still to be discussed. These are more just the design options of the exact system.
Oh, okay.
And the funding will come later. And there's multiple combinations of things for Council's consideration.
Yeah, thank you. I think that answers that. At the end of the day, it is council's decision how much they would, even under that local improvement tax, how much council would fund from county funds and how much would be shared by the local residents. How that distribution happens and what those costs are and how it gets shared among the residents would be worked out within the local improvement plan if council directed administration to create one.
So, question to administration. Has there been rough, like apples to apples of a fully shared distribution system as opposed to a partially shared distribution set? And does administration have a preference once we make down that road, like, will you guys make your preference known what you prefer to do? Because it seems to me that if you have a one reservoir, theoretically it should be less hassle down the road because you're not worrying about each individual cistern, right? I'm just wondering, what is the thought process going forward? Like, will you guys give us what you prefer, what you would prefer to do, and what if it is a more expensive option, why you still prefer that option?
So through the read, yes, if council again was to direct administration to go and conduct the full review and come back to the council with the plan and the ratepayers, we would look at each of the viable options in terms of a fully shared system with a reservoir and a pump as opposed to individual cisterns. We would look at all of those various options. There are a few of those which are addressed on this screen, which administration would tend to lean towards. There's obviously, the sky's the limit in terms of how you can structure these systems, but the ones that we've covered here would be the ones that would make the most sense in general. And then what we would do is look at the different costs in terms and look at for cost efficiencies, operational as well as capital, and then present council with those options with the associated costs with administration's recommendation of which option, both from maintenance and durability, as well as operational efficiencies, makes the most sense. And it could be a couple options that are equal, but we would present council with those options.
Any other questions regarding this piece? I think we're good. Thank you.
So this next slide actually shows a design proposal that was completed back, I believe, in 2020, around the time that the WRC line was being installed. And so this is a design proposal that came forward. And what you can see here is that there's multiple connection points. So I believe there's 13 connection points on this design proposal. And to just present this, there's another one that we'll present, which was actually brought to council during the last council meeting. But this shows the one that was completed there. It has 13 connections. It has the distribution line. And what this one involves is an individual vault on each connection, with then a cistern inside of the house. And we just present this in terms of, it's information that administration has in hand right now. And we also have a high level or preliminary cost estimate associated with this one. And so I'll just go on to the next slide. So that system includes direct tie-ins to the regional water line. You can see on First Street there, some of those residents have a direct connection, and then other residences deeper in the community have a shared distribution line. 13 residential water hookups, which included vault, residential hookup, tying into the main line, distribution lines of the whole system. It did follow the rural connection model with the WRC with the exterior vaults. Connection from the vault to the existing home plumbing, and so in this case it would have been detaching from the well and then attaching into the system, going into the same cistern that the residents would have. The estimated installation cost for this whole system, updated, we've done a few updates for present day dollars. Again, it is very preliminary at this point, to keep in mind, is about $370,000, with the distributions being 153 of that, and the individual hookups being about 217,000, so about 17,000 on average per hookup. And that's the cost with the vaults that we would expect to have some time around, or that we would still expect if the distribution line was installed and then residents needed to come and hook up this system. We estimate with the vault option, which Councillor Kester did point out, may be a more expensive option than putting those components inside the house, would be about 17,000 per residence. This next slide shows the recent proposal that was brought to council during the last meeting. So this one is the distribution line only, coming into the community. So the one line running at the top of the screen, and then the other line running vertically on the screen. It does have the hot tap connection and the isolation valve at the connection to the WRC line, and then it has the 2-inch lines running through the community and the flushing hydrant. It doesn't include any of the hookups to the residences. It's just the distribution line only, and the hookups would have to happen later. The estimated cost that was presented to council for this system on screen is about $75,000. Any questions on those two slides before we move on?
So was it, if you looked at the 74,000 and is it 13 residents that were wanting to connect? It's just 7? Okay.
Because there's only 7 though.
Yeah, good question through the Reeve that I neglected to mention is this second line does focus on servicing what our understanding are the current residents in the community that are interested in the water hookup, rather than the full 13. Our understanding is that there isn't that full 13 interest right now, and so this accommodates the 7 that, as we understand, do want to hook up. Obviously, if council was to direct administration to conduct a further study, we would get into more details with the residents in terms of everybody who wants to connect and reach out to the residents, although we've obviously had some communication on that with council already.
So then it would be about $11,000 per residence just for the distribution line, and then they would need to pay for the additional whatever cost to get to their homes.
Through the that's correct, yeah. Based on this proposal, yeah.
Councillor Kester, then Deputy Reeve Clausen.
Okay, right now there's only about 7 residents there. There's some on the other side of the road. This line can service any residence that comes onto any lot, right? Some of the hookups will be a little longer, but it's onto private property. So you don't need a line running through the middle, because that one is a barn. Would be a little shorter for that house, but if you take in the total length to get it there, it's shorter to go to either the 2-inch or the 4-inch. I think it would service well the needs of the hamlet right now where that line is going. Not a big area.
So is a 2-inch line is that a standard sized?
Through the Reeve, it does look reasonable for what it's servicing. If we were to go and do that study, we would want to just confirm the size of the line, both considering current individuals who are interested in hooking up to the line, as well as consideration of potential future considerations if that was warranted.
Deputy Reeve Clausen.
Yeah, I just want to, I have a checklist of things after we're done here that I'll bring up. There's some other considerations too, but yeah, just looking at the design, I think it's important there for council to know that WRC's looking at this from whatever the main hookup is into the house, the vault, the cistern, all that kind of stuff will be borne by the property owner. That's the way we treat all rural customers. That's why we're looking at this, because we just don't have the money to put it forward. It's more the cost of the main is what we're figuring out and how it would go. This is unique, I think, Brad, because most of our other, well, all of our other hamlets that have water have an infrastructure system in place that's substantially beefier than this, has a reservoir, has fire protection, has all that stuff, right? So it's kind of unique. That's why I wanted definitely council to be aware of what we're getting into.
Any other questions regarding these elements of the presentation?
Okay, thank you. So the next slide does talk about the funding and potential funding and cost sharing options. Again, similar to the infrastructure options, these aren't a comprehensive list of the options, but it does present some funding models which seem to make sense in this case. Depending on whether the system was a distribution system installed, owned, and operated by the county, or whether it was likewise with the WRC. So on the left-hand side under Wheatland County, the two obvious options are for the distribution line that it could be fully funded by the county, in which case there's no point going down the local improvement tax route. If council decided to pass the costs on to the residents through a debenture or local improvement tax, then it would go the local improvement tax, and that would be for any proportion of those costs. And so if council said county pays 50%, residents pay 50%, that 50% would still go under the local improvement tax. So whatever proportion of that council decided would be covered by the end users. On the WRC side, the options are, and understanding that, with the understanding that not all of these options may be amenable to the WRC, but they're just presented here for information. So one would be fully funded by the WRC with no involvement by the county. Our understanding in conversations with the WRC, and was mentioned here, the WRC doesn't have the reserves in hand to fund that, and so they would be looking at a direct loan with the financier, or passing all upfront costs to the residents for the upfront installation of the infrastructure. On the other side, again, it could be fully funded by and through the WRC, potentially using a grant, a loan or grant by the county, and then the WRC has indicated likely, again subject to review by the WRC board, that could then be debentured to the account holders through utility bills or even through utility rates. Just on the bottom of the screen then, it summarizes that a little bit further. So some of the options are the local improvement tax, debentures, utility bills, fully funded by the county, in which case the above three wouldn't apply. The grant from the county to the WRC could be accompanied with Wheatland preferred shares in the WRC is something for council to consider in the future. And the cost sharing through a local improvement tax may carry the least risk for repayment to the county, just in terms of the ability and authorities to collect on those if in a situation of a default. It's registered against the property and is not dependent on whether there's an active utility account. On the WRC side, any outstanding accounts on their end, my understanding, and we do plan to do some further review with this, but my understanding is they would have to go through a collection agency to get that. They don't have the same powers and authorities as the county has to collect on those. Maybe just on that, if there are any questions on that slide before we move on. Okay. And then the last slide is just a few other points for further discussion. So either system supplier, Wheatland County or the WRC, would require the accessible shutoff valve located on the property line, so exterior to the residence. Optional with WRC, which we have discussed. The backflow preventer, the shutoff valve, could be installed on the inside of the home. The estimated cost per residential hookup with the full exterior vault is about $17,000. Again, that's a very preliminary estimate, which would need to be confirmed. If using full or partial cost recovery model with benefiting owners, such as under the local improvement tax or debentures, the county likely has the more secure means for collecting outstanding accounts than would the WRC. And that concludes the presentation. This slide was added into the presentation just because in case there's any questions from council. We don't need to go through it in detail. This is the cost summary that we were able to find in regards to the installation of the regional water line that went in. It looks option 3, we believe it looks like, was the option that was chosen for this, and this shows the costs as well as the installing the line, as well as the actual cost that was incurred by the WRC or the municipalities when installing the line. So that's just there for information. And if there's any other questions, I'm here to answer them, obviously. And we've got our finance manager as well as Bryce Mackin, our utility manager, is also here in case there's any detailed questions that I'm not able to handle. So,
questions from council?
So just a quick question, and it's probably my ignorance, but is a project like this, is this not why the Wheatland Regional Corporation exists, so that they could do this stuff rather than the county getting involved? I haven't been to a meeting yet, so.
So through the Reeve, the Wheatland Regional Corporation does provide rural connections to a number of residences where they are close to the line, and it makes sense to connect. The model in Redland, it would be feasible to use that type of connection type. This one's a little bit unique in that sense, in that you're not necessarily hooking up one home, but there is an opportunity potentially for some cost savings by using a shared distribution line off of that line into the homes that are there. It is kind of a hybrid, I would say, acreage community, or somewhere between our Murfield, Speargrass type communities, and somewhere between an acreage community. And so I think either option does make some sense. I think that's where, if council directed administration to do that, we would take that back, look at those options, look at the costs associated with each option, and then come back to council with some recommendations, and at which point council could make some decisions in regards to how the project would get financed and how the cost could get shared.
I guess one other point too, Brad. WRC hasn't paid for 1 inch of pipe that they've put, hasn't paid 1 penny for anything. It's all been grant money from the Alberta government and county, and Standard and Rocky Ford put in what they put into. So I think it worked out to 92 or 93 cent dollars. Because the biggest part of the project was part funded by the federal government as well. Oh yeah, they haven't paid for one inch of pipe. 1% of anything, really.
Yeah. Through the Reeve, the grants were quite high on this project, which was great when it was originally installed. And then for all of the rural connections that go in, it's the homeowners or the landowners that pay for all of the infrastructure for all those rural connections.
I guess one other point, if there's 7 homeowners there, they all have to go through county road allowance. They'd all have separate pipes. There'd be more connections on the main line. This way there's just...
Deputy Reeve Clausen.
Just to further to Councillor Larson, the original scope of the project for WRC, rural users were user pay, basically, if you wanted to hook up your farm or whatever. Redland kind of, because of the ability to go through there and pick up, it opened up some options, and the infrastructure is a little different, more hookups and that kind of thing. But I do have some basically breakdown questions for council that we can check off some boxes. Like, do we want to service Redland is number one, which I think we do. How much is the cost? Who pays for the infrastructure? Main line would be the county, or service connections would be the landowner through WRC. Are we covering the costs? Who owns the main lines after? Like these kind of things. My thing that I want to know is, I think we should go to the community and ask them what they want, because future capacity, once we do this, those lots that are empty right now, they may want to provide water to them and have more development there. It is a nice little area. But I mean, I don't want to limit what we're doing here. Do they want fire protection? That could be something. I mean, there are fair ways from any, the rural fire departments we have, maybe they want to have something. Maybe that's something we need to look at too. Don't want to short sell ourselves. And the other thing I was just thinking of here, and I know because I've seen this on a lot of other things, when you hook up a regional water line, pretty sure those landowners have to decommission their wells. Pretty sure, because why would you have 2 water sources? I know in Strathmore there's some old wells. I think we've had some where people have to decommission. They have to have a plan. Because you don't want to have it, I want to take the water today, but tomorrow I don't because I have a well. So that's something that I just was thinking about that we should probably look at too. So those are just some of the questions we need to answer. And It's not a lot of money to get the water to these people. I do know they need it, but I think we should be asking them what they want. So if they want fire protection and they want water there, that's something that we have to look at. And it comes at a greater expense, obviously.
Councillor Bigger?
Is there a cost to decommissioning a well?
Yes.
Is it a big cost?
It depends. You get M&M or somebody to come in and do it.
They got to cap it or whatever.
I think we had to do Rosebud's. Yeah, we do right now.
So each landowner would have to decommission their well.
They should.
Just a appointment schedule for ReveLink. Just a reminder, we have an appointment at 10, and the person is dialing in remotely, and I think they're just kind of time crunched or time sensitive. So
Sounds good. Thank you for the reminder. With council's permission, perhaps we can just pause this conversation. We could move to our 10 a.m. appointment with Ms. Field regarding the Community Enhancement Regional Board, and then we could resume this conversation following that presentation. Good morning and welcome. And good morning, Marcy. I hope you can hear us.
Good morning, Marcy. Are you available to speak to us? We're prepared in case Marcy isn't able to call. She's over out of the country.
Sounds good.
oh, she just called it.
Perfect.
Perfect timing.
Thanks. Good morning. Is that you, Marcy?
Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome.
It is me. Thank you. Thank you. Delighted to be here from Kelowna, BC.
Say hi to my son. I miss him. Welcome. We're glad you're here, Marcy. Please go ahead.
Annually, the Wheatland County Community Enhancement Regional Board, CURB, meet to review, evaluate, prioritize, and decide the distribution of funding set aside in the Community Enhancement Reserve. This program began in 2012, 10 years ago, and to date has contributed $4,476,835.55 for the enhancement and betterment of Wheatland County. Applications from nonprofit organizations within the county were accepted in January 2022, and the board met via Zoom meetings on March 30th and April 27th, 2022 to review these applications. Board members assembled to undertake the task of reviewing 46 applications, including a total request for grant funds of $547,803, focusing on operating funding, particularly for organizations and groups within the county. From the 46 applications, the committee is recommending funding for 43 applications, totaling $495,469.46. 3 community enhancement grant funding applications are being proposed to be declined. The board respectfully submits the attached recommendations to Wheatland County Council for consideration for the 2022 Community Enhancement Grant funding. The board has followed its guidelines in making these recommendations and extends its appreciation and thanks to County Council for the opportunity to be part of this community enhancement initiative. Respectfully submitted. Are there any questions?
Any questions?
I'm new to being on this side of the board. Marcy, it's Shannon Laprise.
Hi, Shannon.
Hi.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm curious about the Hazar operations. They're significantly higher than anybody else's operations request. So I'm just curious if there's a reason for it to be so high, if you recall.
what I do recall, without having the books in front of me, Jessica, who is brilliant, noticed that right from the beginning, and she reached out to them and asked for an explanation. And based on their current utility bills, utilities have jumped that much, and that's what they project them to be. The question that the board came back is if their funding, if their utilities actually don't come out to that amount, they will need to return any amount in excess because their invoicing that they submit is the actuals when they do their reporting at the end of the year. And fortunately, however the funds came in, we were able to meet almost fully most of the operational. Shannon, it was a different process than it had been in previous years. We were very fortunate to be able to have the funding this year to be able to meet it, but are also looking at actuals. But they submitted requests back and did some data back to Jessica with an actual letter indicating that this is where their utilities were currently at. I don't understand why it's different in the buildings. We also made a recommendation, and Jessica's working on it, that we will alter the form slightly, asking the groups to show us what their actual utilities are when they're submitting these requests in some of that. So there's some slight changes to the application process so that we can have a bit more data to look at when we're making these recommendations.
Good idea.
Perfect. Thanks, Marcy, for that information. We do have Jessica here too, if you want to draw on her and her insight as well, just in case you can't see, but she is in our meeting as well. Any other questions for Marcy? Council's wishes.
I'll move that council approve the 2022 Community Enhancement Grant funding for $495,469.46 as recommended by the Community Enhancement Regional Board, and that this amount be funded from the Community Enhancement Reserve.
There's a motion on the floor. Any questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried. The second recommended resolution on page 43.
I'll move that council approve the Community Enhancement Regional Board terms of reference for the 2023 funding cycle.
Any questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried. To Marcy and Jessica, on behalf of council, thank you for all of the work that you and your board did. I know it's a substantive amount of work reviewing all of the applications, and on behalf of council, we genuinely appreciate it, and we appreciate the diverse perspectives that are presented on your board and just the good regional representation that's there as well. So please pass along our thanks to your members. Council genuinely appreciates it. Marcy, thank you.
Thank you, and best wishes. Enjoy the spring. Looking forward to hopefully some rain in our area.
Absolutely.
Have a good one, everyone.
Take care, Marcy.
Bye.
So the community, I can't remember the name of it, the Cars Land and Gleason Get, what's that called?
The Hamlet
Enhancement Fund?
Enhancement Fund.
I think so,
Okay.
yeah.
So that fund that was given to Gleason and Cars Land, that's been set up, is it only for capital or is it for operations also?
Through the REIV, it's for both operations or capital. And they also, those groups can apply for project grants through CURB as well. So there's optionality around that as well for those groups.
I think I was under I think one of the communities is under the impression that they cannot go apply for the...
Wasn't that a rule for CRISP? I think
Oh, it's a
Yes.
rule for Chris.
It
but
was,
not for-
it was a rule for Chris, but
Like
it was changed, and it has been communicated to
It has been.
all the groups for sure. I've done that both years on that to make clear that there's been a change in that, because it was kind of a, council reviewed that when they put in that first, or the Hamlet grant program with the Galatian and Carsland, that there was an inequity there. So that's been sorted out, and that has been communicated. That we haven't got the applications from those groups for any of the curb grants, so I'm assuming that the other funding is meeting their needs.
It's being used for that. Okay.
Good clarification for sure. Any other questions? Would council like a 5-minute break before we resume the discussion around Redland? Okay, we'll reconvene at 10:15.
They thought they could like swing down a pole.
Sorry?
I was like, I don't know if they have a pole.
I don't know. I've seen some little guys that are pretty darn
Don't
tough.
think so.
I always get a kick out of people that say, well, I've never lost a fight. And then to them I say, you've not been in enough fights then. A little guy that's a good boxer can do, it's amazing what damage they can, even though someone might have a 6-inch reach on them, if they're a better boxer, boom, oh. Yeah, that's not really council information, is it? No.
Mute off.
You had a wild weekend there, Rick?
That's okay. That's,
Oh, yeah.
we'll call the meeting back to order, and we'll resume our discussion regarding 2.32, Redland Water Servicing. Councillor Kester.
In talking to the residents of Redland, all they want is a 2-inch line put in. They don't want a cistern. There's no need for it now. If you put a cistern in for fire, then you have to have a fire truck. And that's, the expense for the cistern is way more than what the cistern costs, really. So, but in the future, say something happens in Redland and it expands, you can always put a cistern in then. Like the infrastructure's there. You could put in a cistern and you could supply rosebud size or bigger. 4-inch is all that supplies Galatian. 4-inch coming down there. Goes to Rocky Ford too. So the future capacities, we're not curtailing anything. The original study that you seen up there for $300,000, and that's what scared all the residents, because they got a letter for, do you want water? It'll cost you $30,000. And Carsale said, no. County said, oh, they don't want water. So it's been a big holdup. So if you, what they want, and they signed the letter here, I emailed it to council. This letter says, please be advised that the residents of Redland are aware that when the water main line is installed, that each homeowner is responsible for the cost to bring the water to their property. So all they're asking for is the main line. They got a reliable quote. I would say he's going to do it for the $75,000. And if Wheatland County gives them the $75,000, it can come with proviso that you're not getting any more. $75,000 and put it in. I'm sure he'll do it for the $75,000. There's a lot of residents there are rooting for him, so, and he's been closely involved with it all the time. So I would say it's a reliable bid. Anyway, it's not up to the county who puts it in. If you give the funding to WRC, it's WRC's aim. Put the line in, it'd be WRC's line. The residents are asking that the county pay the $75,000 as a grant to WRC. They view it as a piece of infrastructure. They look at Galicia, Rosebud, Carsland. They need infrastructure. The county puts it in, unless it's a large thing like a cistern or a reservoir. Rosebud paid for a long time ago. They got a grant for 75%. County put in money. They might have paid 10%. That new reservoir. And then Carsland have ventures too. They paid not for the whole thing. There was grant money involved with that too. But they look at it as infrastructure, and they are paying the hookup fees, and that's their entry into the game. The reason why they want the county to pay and give it to they're open to two ways. So if you give the grant to WRC and the meters belong to WRC, they're paying the high water rates. WRC rates are $5 and something this year. County rates are they $2.22 or something? There's quite a difference in the water rates. If the county puts it in and wants to be paid back the $75,000, they would like the county to retain ownership of that line, thereby they being billed by the county for the water, and they would be happy to pay the $2.22 plus the debenture. That makes sense? Feel like that way they're exactly treated the same as the other hamlets. They're paying for the debenture, they're getting the county water at that rate. If you want them to belong to WRC, they're paying the high rate, and they would see it as a piece of infrastructure. I know the tax is there, but we put in miles of dust control. We're doing it again this year. It's not for heavy traffic. We're putting in a band surface. It's just for dust control for local residents there. We're not charging them anything. We do it in other parts of the county too for different things. That's how we share the tax money. So in the future, if we're going to have a debenture for this, or we're going to have a debenture for 5 people wanting dust control, we're going to want to have people debenture a piece of local road improvement. I don't want to go down that road. This is just local infrastructure, is the way I look at it. So they would ask WRC that if they would put in the line, you would grant $75,000 for it, and that's it. WRC are well experienced. They've put in line from Galicia to Rosebud, put in expanded treating capacity and reservoirs. They are experienced in doing this, and this contractor has done numerous pipes too, not the mains, but these done short takeoffs. So that's what they want. One option or the other, but they don't like to see a mix of make them pay the high rate and make them pay it back. They don't see that as fair.
I just have a question through, Chair. So is that for 13 people, that the 75,000?
There's only 7 living there now that want the water.
So that 13 is just for empty lots?
They're empty lots,
Oh,
and
okay.
one of the lots you'll see a building on. I think it's a barn or a storage or a, nobody live in.
Okay, so it's for 7 people. And is that including, what's included in that? Is that shut-off valve would be?
That'd be up to WRC, but I'm sure they're going to put in a main shut. And they'll only put valves in for when they do hookups. I don't think they're going to dig it. They're going to tunnel it in. So if there's an empty lot there, they're not going to put a valve there. They'll only put a valve in when there's an actual hookup.
Okay, so when someone, let's say that lot sells, it's up to WRC to put a valve in there then? Not the county?
Yeah.
Okay.
County, if you give it to WRC, it's their responsibility. And they just charge hookup fee to the customer. They got no money to do.
So what about decommissioning the wells? Would that be something that would have to be done?
You could put that in as a condition. These wells are shallow.
Like WRC would do that, right? No? No, I mean, in the condition, we wouldn't have that condition. Would we on ours? It would be WRC condition.
It would be WRC. I'm
Okay.
sure it'd be just a few bags of bentonite. Wells aren't deep, they're dry.
So I guess for me, the bigger question here is Redland then considered by the county as a hamlet, the same as Speargrass or Gleason or Cluny would be? And if the answer to that question is yes, then what have we done for the other communities? Because we should treat them no different than any other hamlet that we've done stuff for.
And I guess, and I'm with you, Councillor Larson, like one of my concerns, and I've been trying to sort this out just right now because I should know this, so. We have 24 distinct communities in Wheatland County, 12 of which I had previously read were officially recognized as hamlets, but there's only 9 on our municipal affairs profile. So what we have listed as hamlets under municipal affairs is Carsland, Chancellor, Cheadle, Cluny, Gleason, Lyleton, Nameka, Nightingale, Rosebud. And then under our community profiles on our website, we have Ardenode, Baintree, Barstow, Crowfoot, Dallam, Duck Lake, Eagle Lake, Makepeace. Redland is not listed on municipal affairs, but I believe it was on a different list of hamlets that we had. Rosebud Creek, Stobart, Strangmere, Tudor, Wintering Hills, and then we've had the addition of Muirfield. The only communities out of those that to today's date we have provided servicing is Carsland, Speargrass, Cluny partially, but not water. Gleason and Rosebud. Obviously, we have the distinction with the water line going through Redland, and the county did invest significantly, to my understanding, potentially more than what we would have spent just on a water treatment plan for Gleason itself. But of course, now we have added Rosebud onto there, so that, but there was a substantive cost for that as well. I haven't actually found in my files like a comparison of what it would have cost to just service Gleason like individually if there was like demonstrated efficiencies by doing it regionally. Likely that was examined and likely there were. I don't personally have evidence of that, but we did invest substantially in that. And so in effect, we have invested substantially in that main line through Redland already. I do, and I am very sympathetic to Redland, like please don't misinterpret this. But there is an equity question or a justice question we're moving towards. We have an upcoming agenda item 2.411 where we're looking at utility servicing and striving for cost recovery, because fundamentally I do not think it's just for ratepayers across the county to be subsidizing utilities that not all ratepayers across the county have access to or utilize. I have begged council and pled with council to implement changes gradually so it doesn't hit our hamlet owners that are serviced, to go to full cost recovery, like when we were first discussing in 2017, 2018, that would have been very challenging. We have a number of, hamlet residents who are on fixed incomes or things like that, and it would have been a hardship. We have been increasing and I'd look to administration to correct me, but I think 15% a year to our utility rates, or at least we had set that for 3 years previously, but looking at the analysis on 2.411, we're still not keeping costs or keeping abreast of even the increases that we're seeing in this servicing. So my concern about not having some sort of cost recovery mechanism built in is we have these other 20 communities. Now, granted, they're not on a water line, but we're also in the process of looking at a West Side servicing plan, which potentially could see water lines going through or close to some of these other communities. And then what does that look like when those communities are approaching council and saying, you set a precedent by funding these lines into Redland at $10,000 per residence? How do we then say no to if Cheadle came to us and said, we would like $10,000 per residence to bring water lines through Cheadle? Or through, I mean, you can pick other communities depending on where the West Side servicing may go. And I have the same question as you, Councillor Lowerson. And I think it does make sense for us to strategically invest. And the West Side servicing, I think there is a strong rationale for strategically investing in that with some of the growth pressures and the development, potential development that we're seeing there, especially from the tax diversification, which does benefit all ratepayers in Wheatland County. And I think administration is fleshing that out so that we have a strong rationale for any investment there. But I do have concerns here, and I know one of the challenges is the access to water there. There are municipalities, we have neighbors. We have a neighbor whose reeve has trucked in water since the 1970s and had to, use their cistern and access water just because they have some water servicing in their county, but not to everybody. This could escalate depending on what happens with, we were in a severe drought last year. I don't want to jump on like an emergency bandwagon around that, but we could see changes to water table levels. And we have agricultural producers, who water is critical for as well. This is a really complex thing, and it's easy to say it's only $75,000, and in the grand scheme of our budget, that is not a hugely significant amount, but it's when you extrapolate that out to these other communities within the county and contemplate the precedent that we could be setting. So those are just some concerns that I'm grappling with, and I'm not sure where I've arrived at yet. Deputy Reeve Clausen.
Yeah, for Councillor Larson too, a lot of the Gleason was its own municipality at one time, so was Rosebud, so maybe it was paid by a developer. Muirfield was all paid for by development, all the mains and stuff, and then typically it gets handed over to the municipality when the final FACs are done, and then they look after it. So really the county doesn't put that investment in. However, we do maintain it down the road, which is when you see we're going and replacing mains in different places. And usually, typically there's some grant funding available for that. Unfortunately for this, I don't think there's any grant funding available for this. I believe we looked at it at WRC when we ran the line through to see if we could, but there wasn't. And there is that definition of an hamlet. It's always kind of been in the back of my mind too. There is a boundary around Redland, and there is some people just outside of this as well that are getting services, and they're paying for their own. At quite a length of line too. They have to go underneath the Rosebud River. I believe they have to tunnel underneath it too to get water. So. And we had to basically say, well, there's a boundary. We have to respect that boundary. So.
Yeah, and I will verify, Gleason was a village up until the dissolution of their autonomous municipality, and they had put in the servicing. And Gleason has and still does, like I see on page 106, been debentured for some of the infrastructure for both future and they were paying a debenture for previous infrastructure that had been put in place. Councillor Eckert.
Turn on your mic. Apology. Question for administration. In Redlands, there are 13 separate landowners.
Through the Reeve, that's something that we would want to review for sure if council decided for direct administration to go and do the report. The original infrastructure plan that was brought forward in 2020, when the line was going in, there was 13 individual hookups. I've heard here, and from what we could tell, one of those looks like it is a barn that was on that plan, and so we would need to review that, but. At the end of the day, I think here what we want to ascertain too is how many residents are interested in hooking up. I keep hearing the number 7, so we'll go with that. But as far as the number of residents in there, it's somewhere around 11, 12, 13. Yeah, that's my understanding.
In order for local improvement tax, they would have to get 2/3 of 13 or 12. So we're looking at 8 or 9, right? Like, the reason this is sort of important is when I was in the city, my neighbors all decided they wanted the back alley paved. I didn't want that back alley paved. It was not in. But because they signed up 2/3 of the people, I ended up with a paved back alley. Now, what comes with the paved back alley is the fact that the property price value goes up. It's just one of those things. I think this is that whole, if we provide water and we do this sort of at a piecemeal operation thing, I think we're just opening up a Pandora's box that all of a sudden this whole area is now, the biggest drawback to living in Redlands is having no water. And now all of a sudden you can have water. So I have a problem like the Reeve mentioned, like we're giving $10,000 per person, and I believe that in a very short period of time, we're going to run across the same thing in Cheadle, in the fact that there will be water running by or very close to Cheadle, and the same thing could happen. And if we sit down there and say, well, they did it over there, why wouldn't they do it here? So I've got a problem. This improves every person in that area. It increases their property value. And I mean, like I don't know how much it increases if you have water. I just go from personal experience. If I didn't have a really good well on my farm would be worth a lot less money. So, yeah. So I'm just trying to figure out whether or not, if we go down the local improvement tax, whether or not there is the appetite for the people in Redlands to sign on to this. I believe that's the way it has to be, but I'm not sure if there's that opportunity will be there for them. So.
General Manager Bullock, and then Councillor Larson.
Thank you. Through the Reeve, just as a point of clarification in regards to the local improvement tax. So that petition does follow the petition process outlined in the MGA. In this case, for the local improvement, it's 2/3, but it's 2/3 of the benefiting ratepayers, and that would have to get defined as part of that process of who is the benefiting ratepayers. And so if not all of that 13 is benefiting, they may not necessarily be included as part of that 2/3, but that is a determination that council needs to make as part of that petition process.
And council, it's also 2/3 as well, but they must represent at least half of the value of the assessment.
And then in addition, I just brought it up on screen again, there is another mechanism for these in which council can approve the local improvement plan to be prepared outside of the petition process as well.
Councillor Larson.
It was a good point made by, I forget who, but I mean, Gleason and Cluny, as we know, were villages at one time, but I believe Carsland and Speargrass never were, so that would probably be a more fair comparison. So what have we done for Speargrass and Carsland? It doesn't have to be a water line, but in a similar fashion to improve their whatever it is we've done. Because then we have a precedent that says, okay, this makes sense. Because because they've never been villages.
Answer some of that. Oh, sorry.
Okay, yeah, go ahead and I can supplement any.
They debentured it. I don't know if there was any grant money offered to it, but there was the lagoon, and it was debentured.
Yes, and what I can do is I can send council, all of council, a copy of the bylaw that was approved by council, and it does outline the funding in that. So with that, it's actually a really good bylaw to review. I think the bylaw was done in 2004, around there anyways. And what it was is there was a 75% grant. I think it was under AMWIP, and it had to do with desludging the current lagoon, potentially some expansion. And then it kind of sets out the funding parameters in there as well. And then I believe that amount ended up on the utility bills of the residents for collection. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that would seem to me to be a fair comparison. So that because then I agree with Councillor Eichler. If Cheadle comes along next time, or whoever, we have to have something that says we're fair and equitable to all communities.
Consistency, I think, will be key. Councillor Kester?
One time the residents were talking about the curb money, and I know we'll take Clooney or Cheadle. They got a skating rink, and that was all paid for by curb money. And Gleason had, Carsland had a big grant for curb money there too at one time. But it's curb money, it's a different funding stream, and it would go through the process we just did. And they'd probably be quite successful in that. But the thing with the curb money is they have to wait a whole another year, and they don't have water. If you go through the same process as debenture at Rosebud and Carsland, even Gleason for that matter, there was a grant money paid for 75% of it, then the remaining 25%. I don't think the full total was, Brian can look it up, but only a part of that total was debentured. The county put in something too, so. County's always doing it, but if the county puts it in, the residents are quite agreeable to debenturing it.
I was under the assumption.
Putting a local tax on, but they would like the line to remain in county ownership and get county bills. That would be there. They have no trouble with it, and they probably prefer it that way, but they just thought it'd be easier for the county to put the money in now instead of trickling it in with reduced rates over a period of, forever.
Just on the note around billing too, my personal preference, just from my current understanding, would be to keep that within the county as well, just so that it, again, the consistency between the other urban, if you will, servicing that we're doing. I know there's the distinction between the rural and the urban, but I would prefer not to muddy and have WRC be billing like one of our urban, if you will, communities, hamlets, just so that we have consistency, recognizing that there's a different approach to rural. But if we're looking at this more as county-owned infrastructure, my preference would be for us to maintain that billing. And I do appreciate just the leverage that the county has in terms of collectability. And at the end of the day, because it is critical infrastructure, and again, I did not take the time to validate this, but I have a sense that if there are long-term issues at the end of the day, it would be the county that would end up being responsible for maintenance or decommissioning or whatever would be necessary if there was significant issues. Councillor Kester?
I agree with you. And in the future, if something were to happen down there and there was a bunch of homes come on stream, and there has to be expansion, maybe a cistern, maybe fire, the county already owns the infrastructure and they would be in control of it. Today, maybe it looks sweeter to go the other way, but if you look into the future, I believe the county owning it, the same as other hamlets we have, would be the smarter thing to do, for sure.
So, I don't want to cut off conversation. Deputy Reeve Clausen?
Just was popped in my head. The money that was originally said at $30,000 a lot to hook up, that is not online. I know Bears Paw, Rocky View Water Co-op, I think the hookup fees are about $38,000 for just a home. That comes with service. It comes with a pressured service, mind you, not a cistern. But that is very typical of these rural areas. It's getting more and more all the time because costs are just so much, and you want to board on the development. So when you look at it from that side. And it came to my mind because we were talking about future at Redland, and we could easily say, well, this is it for now. Any future has to have, the payment will be what the cost is to do it, right? Like how much, if you want to service a lot, it's going to be whatever it costs to do it, that's what you pay.
Oh, you're saying if there's growth or
There's growth,
expansion.
yeah. So, and I know we have some policies in place for hooking up stuff in other municipalities that already have good infrastructure in and stuff. So it's just something you have to keep in mind. It doesn't get any cheaper as time goes on.
And I'm certainly personally open to looking at different ways of billing or that type of thing, because the debenturing and spreading it out like we have done in other communities does just make it more attainable, I think, for a lot of residents. But like Councillor Larison pointed out, we do have a number of ratepayers who are also in hamlets who do have that full cost. I've had neighbors who have had to sink $20,000, $30,000 into, a well failure, that type of thing. So, and that's in a hamlet in Wheeling County as well. The distinction, obviously, there is no water line there. So I think there is some rationale for looking at this, and I'm totally open to looking at different models. I do think my preference would be for administration to be involved in with council, obviously with council involvement as well, but in some more formal engagement in terms of the number of ratepayers who might be interested, if there's different models that can be looked at, if there's a local preference for that model, and then maybe there's some kind of either policy we can look at that already exists, depending on what's there, or if we can draft a policy. That way we could have some consistency where if this arises in another community in the future, we have a model and we're not sort of doing those one-offs or having inequity or further inequity in how we're approaching utilities. So for go forward, I'll just float, does administration have sort of a path? Have you contemplated sort of some engagement? I know we've done engagement. I feel like we could build on the engagement that's been done and say we recognize that there was clear messaging that the $30,000 in one shot is not amenable to the residents. Could we draft some models of what a debenture could look like or what a local improvement tax could look like with some rough estimates or something like that, and maybe hold an open house? Or
through the read, certainly we could do something like that. I think what you're suggesting is a process outside of the local improvement tax process, just to do some further investigation. So.
Councillor Kester and Deputy Reeve Klassen right after.
I was be more focused. Don't want to be we got a lot of options today. We could get council to agree to focus in on this will be county-owned infrastructure. We want cost recovery. We want to have a process so when a new house comes on, they have to be part of it, or we're going to debenture all the lots. Okay? We want to have a cost to hook up to it. And in the future, we could spread that cost out more if 10 houses come along, or 20, or the developer would pay for the cistern and whatnot. But if the county takes it over now, what's there? And if there's a failure in a few years, maybe it would qualify for the 75% funding too. So I'd like you to look into the future. This is what it's going to cost each landowner when a new one comes on. We have to charge for that too. So would we make the landowners, the 7 of them, pay for the full shot now, or would the county pay for 7 out of the 13, and residents 7 out of the 13, and leave them? But when they come on, they can pay for that too. So that would just be focused in that. I would be okay with that.
So I was hearing, and I'll just float this, I was hearing some consensus perhaps around if we follow the stream starting at Wheatland County, going down through a partial share, just because I'm hearing some concerns around supply chain issues and cost with shared reservoir and the vaults. If we were to follow that stream down through partial shared, individual interior cisterns, valve and meter, and then from there, administration could draft some rough estimates for like a local improvement tax or a debenture model similar to what might have been done in other communities that might spread out some of that cost so it's not upfront, but that so over time there is the cost recovery. And I think in terms, my personal thoughts on the numbers, that might come from the engagement. So like get a firm establishment so we can cross off properties like there's no residents there or that type of thing, it's uninhabited or whatever. And then that could firm up the numbers. Councillor Kester?
I would throw that $30,000 in the garbage can. That study, that $300,000 engineering thing, throw it in the garbage can and don't even talk about it anymore. We have an estimate now, a contract that could be signed for $75,000 to put in the line. Residents, the 7 of them, all signed the paper that I emailed to council. I hope you got it. We're just waiting for one more signature. He's not home a lot, but I'm pretty sure he'll sign. They're responsible from everything from the main line to their house. So if that's a vault, everything. So don't even talk about that. They said they would be responsible, the same as every other hamlet. When you tie in, you go from the curb stop to your house. That's your responsibility. That's the same as any other place we have. So when you're doing this proposal, don't even get into that. Keep it clean. Keep it on the $75,000 thing that we have that from NIBS. And I'm sure we can build it for that. It would be in and done, and it would service for the immediate future. And if something comes along later, we'll have to deal with it later, but still.
I'm just gonna interject. I'm extremely uncomfortable with this discussion just because that does not align with our procurement policy. And if I understand correctly, I know Deputy Reeve Kleston was going to look into it and confirm, but I'm not sure that WRC has a procurement policy. And so, and I'm not totally clear on where the proposal that came forward to council came from, because my understanding is WRC did not do an RFP or any sort of procurement initiative to gather quotes or that type of thing. So I'd prefer not to discuss like an individual quote that might have, and I'm not sure how it was obtained, if it was just obtained like by you as an individual councillor. And I'm not sure about the parameters of like a group of ratepayers doing something individually with an essential service. If they were looking at some kind of co-op model or something and wanted to pay like an individual to do that, I'm comfortable with that if they're doing it as individual ratepayers. I'm not comfortable with discussing that and awarding a tender that hasn't been RFP'd or followed through our procurement when it's going to be county-owned infrastructure and be built by us and paid by us and that type of thing. I feel strongly that we would need to align with our procurement policy. And I would lean on our administration and the work that was done previously. I think when you actually compare the apples to apples of the numbers that were shared, they're not actually that far off, because I'm sure if you took like that one leg, kind of that center leg on Main Street off of like the county, the proposal that was done in 2020, and you take off the elements that are included in the one proposal versus the other, you get much closer between the two quotes. But I do just want to express that I don't think it's appropriate for council to be discussing like a potential contractor, that type of thing. So I just want to, I guess, caution council about that. Council, I think actually I missed Deputy Reeve Clausen, and then we'll go to Councillor Kester.
So, sorry, I just something that come up here. So this, just for clarification, the distribution line proposal that was presented to us from WRCs, essentially, we'll just say that, was only the mains. You mentioned, Councillor Kester, that they would be responsible for the property line. So then there's individual service connections that have to go from the main to the property line that are not in here. So is that so the main is the main. So it's to your property line, you're digging out into a road to hook up. So that's not in here. From what I understand, that's just the main. So there has to be a line from the main to the property line with a valve put on it. That's the difference between these two proposals right there. That's right. Yeah, because that's.
So I think just in terms of managing expectations for total cost to the homeowner, we do have to be cautious. I'm not comfortable throwing out work that administration did, because this is going, either way you slice and dice it, it's a substantive cost to do water servicing. And I don't want to in any way misrepresent to the ratepayers what their cost will be, total costs. Councillor Kester.
They realize that the cost for them is from the main line to their house. This estimate is below the $75,000, which is the threshold in our procurement policy to go public. Staff can look at this proposal. They can put out tenders to see if anybody else wants to do it cheaper, but this one is underneath the $75,000.
I'll have admitted, I don't want to dive in. I'm not an expert on this, but I'll just hand it over. I think 75,000, there's different processes for different amounts. And then I also would just ask, because administration must also have to estimate the total for the servicing, because there's also a clause about piecing, you can't piece out work to bring it under. I know I read I haven't read it recently, but I am just recalling that. And there is, for even up to 75,000, you do need more than one quote. There's still a distinct process you would need to follow.
That's correct, Reeve-Link. I would say if a quote comes in right at 75, I would then say best practice, although you maybe don't have to, would be to go out and get 3 quotes, because I would question if you then would receive change orders, which would possibly increase the cost of that 75,000. So just because it's just right on that border, I probably would suggest to go out for 3 quotes. If I just may make a suggestion as well, in listening to Councillor Kester and the items that he stated he'd like to have captured, I believe we can follow the local improvement plan and create one, and follow actually the MGA, which states specifically and answers all the items you mentioned. And so although we're not following it formally as in, asking for a petition or anything, because we've already heard from residents, I believe we could just go follow the MGA, and it addresses everything as to how it's going to be paid, the timeline, what would be the cost for each owner, etc. And it's very clearly laid out. And then with that plan, you could take it back to your residents and have possibly a meeting, an open house, to explain the plan to each of them, and then bring it forward to council at that time. That's just a suggestion.
What would be the timeline?
You're looking to me. Through the Reeve, I think that's something that we'd want to just look into before we commit to anything, and then come back to council and let them know what that would be.
I would like to say these people are thirsty. They don't have water, some of them. And it's one guy tries to truck it for them, but they just have small cisterns. So it doesn't pay to get a big truck in because it can't use all the water up, type of thing. So they're between a rock and a hard place. And they don't want to invest in larger cisterns because when they get the water, there's no need for it. So they're looking to the future, and here they'd like to see water this year for sure.
Deputy Reeve Clausen.
Just want to play devil's advocate and put it in perspective a little bit. If we put a bulk water station in there, we'd be over $1 million. I think that's how much we paid for the one that we have. And so, I mean, I understand, and it's the procurement that's the issue with me, and it puts me in a rock and a hard place. And I do sit on WRC board, and I understand as WRC we don't necessarily have to follow some of these rules. I feel from council here, I hear that, like I'm going to a meeting tomorrow night, and I'm saying pretty confidently that we're not going to donate that money. So that's going to be some issues there. So how do we get these people water in the future, and as quickly as we can, and following the proper procedure that we should? That's what I want to do.
And I think that is key, right? Because we are talking about tax dollars that we steward. We have legislative requirements. We do have policies in place that I would posit have not been followed. Procurement is always handled by our administration, not by individual councillors. And there's explicit wording in the policy around that. And we do have heavy legislative responsibilities around procurement and can open ourselves to liability if we're not following our own policies and the associated legislation. So I agree, and I see the challenge with the timing. I absolutely recognize that, and I think council could direct administration to prioritize this work and do it in the most time-effective manner, but we also have to do it properly because this is long-term critical infrastructure that people will rely on. Councillor Kester.
I in no way had any involvement in this procurement or this line proposal that was given to me. I had no knowledge of it. I did not go out and get an estimate. I had none.
So who did it?
The residents did it. And they put this together themselves.
But we can't.
I had no involvement. WRC had no involvement. The residents did this.
When it was Councillor Kester.
Give it to me, I give it to council.
Councillor Kester,
pinning it on me.
When it was presented to council, it was indicated it was done by WRC. WRC indicated they had not gone through any type of procurement policy for this. I apologize if I said that you did. That was my assumption because I had assumed you had provided it to administration. So I apologize, I'm sorry. My comment stands if the residents are doing it independently, that's a different process that is still not aligned with our procurement policy. We cannot have individual ratepayers doing any type of procurement work for the county.
Okay. They did it themselves looking for a grant. They didn't ask the county to take it over. They wanted a grant. No different than the skating rink at Carsland or any other project in the county. They did it for a grant. If the county doesn't want to give a grant, they want to own the infrastructure for future considerations, great, we'll go through that process. I did not in any way try to shortcut anything. This was a grant application by the residents of Redland. If the county wants to move into a debenture or a improvement tax, that's council's decision. And council wants to own this line for future considerations, that's council's decision. Don't get the two mixed up. Don't say you can take out of here and this is what council has to do and administration has to take the 75. If we're going to do this, administration has to go out and get bids and do it the way they're supposed to, right? I'm not asking to shortcut any of that. So council has to make up a mind. Are we going to give a grant? Or are we going to do an improvement tax and own that line, and future councils will be in a better position if expansion comes along? That's the decision we're to make here. But don't get them mixed up, and don't be implicating me in anything. I just presented it on behalf of the residents because they wanted me to present what they gave me. That's all I did. I presented what they gave me on behalf of my residents.
I appreciate that, and thank you for the clarification, Councillor Kester. My concerns were around your comments when you said we should throw in the garbage the work that administration had done and just take the $75,000 contract and pay that and base the numbers on that. So that was $300,000 engineering thing was done by the engineers at WRC, and the county just picked it up. WRC had that done through their engineers, and it was a preliminary engineering study. It's not relevant to what the residents or the county do. So don't even look at that. We're not looking for $300,000. Why would we look at $300,000 when the residents went out and got a $75,000 bid? It's only $75,000. If we were talking $500,000 here, I would say, whoa, or $1 million for a bulk water station, which could be quite useful in the country. We're not asking for any of that. So don't get it confused. If you want to own it, then staff go out and get some numbers. If you want to give a grant, then give the grant. So the consensus of council, I believe, is they want staff to go out and do a local improvement tax, and how much is this going to cost? But keeping in mind that the residents went and got a price for $75,000, and they're willing to stand by it, and they're willing to pick up all the extra fees it costs to get water into their house. Just keep that in mind when you're looking for something and the county comes back with $150,000. It's not going to look so good. Deputy Brief Clausen.
Thanks, Glenn, for the clarification. I understand where you're coming from now. I definitely did not before. I did not realize that this was put by the residents. Honestly, I did not. I don't think. I thought it was something else. So, yeah, I see it now. So I have to think about that for a little bit.
Reeve Link, we have an appointment at 11.
Yes. Okay. I still have a question for administration, so perhaps we'll pause this. I don't mean to belabor it, but this is a critical service. I don't want to cut off discussion around it. So if council is comfortable, we can pause this discussion and we can move to our 11 a.m. closed session under FOIP section 27, privileged information, village demand letter with Mr. Jancy. I will move us into closed session. Any questions or discussion? All in favor? Councillor Kester, all in favor? Motion is carried. And we'll move into closed session, and it'll just take a moment to switch the lines over.
Hi everyone, I'm going to be ending the conference call to go into closed session. Thank you.